it I'd say it's a bit frightening at the moment because we who are there are experiencing a cultural shift in our political landscape that's frightening to those of us who've been a little bit more liberal, in our leanings. And we've seen a dramatic shift, and it started with a language that that's used in discourse and politics that we've never experienced on our side. Starting with one candidate saying to the other, if I got elected, I'm going to lock you up. That level of that lack of civility. It for us, it's shocking. You never see that. We've never seen that in my lifetime.
Well, what explains that?
It's a good question. My own opinion is that there is a certain amount of people who don't see any future for themselves. The work is gone. We've stopped manufacturing, and so there's a lot of our country who manufactured steel or automobiles, or they mined coal, and those industries are not active
certainly on the decline.
Yeah, certainly on the decline, and I think they see no future for that, and they've been told by the Democratic Party for many years that they're going to be trained or retrained for the modern economy. And I think when you asked me earlier about what are the Democrats, what's gone wrong here? Well, I think one of the things is that the Democrats did not understand, and a lot of this has come out since the election. Yeah. Where you look back and you say, well, what went wrong? How could we miss so badly? How could we be so out of touch? How could we let people, let a candidate like this with no experience whatsoever? How could you let this happen? And I think one of the things that came out is that a misunderstanding that people in the middle of the country, these people who worked with their hands, they didn't want to be retrained to computer jobs. That wasn't what they aspired to. So they really wanted to work with their hands, and they thought that's respectable work. They weren't. They didn't think they're going to be engineers, and they wanted to do something that they could be proud of. They could build something that they could be proud of. And I think they missed that. I think they spent a lot of time talking about retraining. The Democrats did, and then they hear a guy come along who said, "We're going to get you your jobs back. We're going to do this," and it's just not possible. Those jobs are not coming back.
But I've driven through some American cities or large towns and noticed the decaying infrastructure, particularly associated with the steel industry. Mm-hmm. And I'm asking myself, okay, how do you revitalize these places that were, in a sense, hugely dependent on a mono-industrial base? Okay, how do you do that? How can you revitalize Dayton in Ohio, and particularly I know it quite well. How about the Detroit? Come to mind. They come to mind. I'm not surprised that there is disenchantment in urban centres like that. Would you buy into that?
Well, I think yes, to a certain extent. I think we are learning now as people are breaking down all these data points, and we're becoming much more aware that we're a country where we do very well on the east and the west coast, and the east and the west coast, which is generally considered sort of the cities. So you have the San Franciscos on one side, and Silicon Valley, out on the west coast, and then you have on the east coast New York and Boston and Washington D.C. And then in the middle you have farmland, and you have what was what was more factory areas that are on the decline. So it's the cities on the end that are producing and contributing most to the economy. And it's the ones in the middle in the southern states that are really suffering from a lack of employment, and it's created I think they're very angry right now, and to a dangerous point. It's what allows a demagogue to get in, to sell you a bill of goods. I'm going to change this. I'm going to change that. I'm going to bring your jobs back. I'm going to bring this, and I for one, I'm like I'm frightened for where we are as a country for the first time in my life, because I think we're at a very, very tenuous place. I think we have in a president somebody who's tapped in to an anger and stoked it, and he's not come out and said to when there's been hate incidents or racial incidents, he hasn't come out and said this is not right, we're all one America, one person. He stoked it, and he's managed that. He's sort of manages by fear, and he's playing to the worst common denominator, and it's a very, very frightening situation, because those who are supposed to be the checks and balances in our government, the checks and balances are supposed to be the Congress and the Senate, and they're supposed to control. The president can't just be a dictator, but they're now in a situation where one party controls all of it, so that they can rubber stamp anything that comes through.
Okay. I'm thinking, Danielle, that the American political system prides itself on the freedom of the individual. Okay. And in its Declaration of Independence, its opening statement is, we hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. But the reality of life for many people, not just in America, but in Western Europe, we're experiencing much the same thing. A disillusionment with that, promise of equality.
Absolutely.
Does the American political system have a social conscience akin to what emerged in Europe in the 20th century? Most European countries, were built on a system of concern for society and for the perhaps people in society who are disadvantaged as well as advantaged. Now, how does that sit with the American experience? The Democrats, certainly in the early years of your formation, the Republicans would have been the ones most likely indicating a social conscience. Would that be true?
Yes, and then somewhere years ago, the parties sort of flipped in the ideology, and so now the Democrats are considered really the more liberal-leaning social conscience, and it flipped. It used to be early on that was reversed in earlier in the American history.
However, I think one of the things that really went wrong with this last election, and that we have to really, and when I say we, I mean liberals, need to pay attention to and wake up to, is that there was a perception of the liberal elite that we had lost touch with those values, that we were for everyone, for making sure. I think there's a perception that we pick which minorities we are going to work for. And in fact, when you look at the Midwest and these people who are losing their jobs, there was this chasm, that's grown between the liberals and these people losing their jobs in the Midwest. There was a perception that we were not going to work for them. And I can see how the perception arose, because as we were alluding to earlier, when you go in and immediately say, don't worry, we're going to train you how to do something else. Well, I don't want to do something else, or at least that's a very frightening prospect. So, rather than immediately saying, don't worry, we're going to take care of you and this is how we're going to do it, you really have to be willing to stop and listen to these concerns and figure out if there's some middle ground, or if you can arrive at a solution that they can buy into. Because when you just say, here's the answer for you and you need to accept it, that's not going to work.
And then I think that created a backlash in a very,
Yes,
very
that's
dangerous
where I was going.
dangerous way, because they said, I've heard this from the Democrats. I can see that this one candidate for president is a pathological liar. He's got all these things that we can enumerate, that have gone on from being caught on tape saying some very offensive things in his treatment of women, of minorities, and then you have another one who, while the Republicans have demonized her for 30 years, she had never been convicted of anything. She's never, it's just at what point do you say they're just demonizing her? There's nothing there. And so you have these people who said, she's horrible, I can't vote for her. There's no difference between the two of these candidates. We knew there would be a binary choice. Most people that I know looked at it and said, that's ridiculous. There's a very clear difference between what these candidates are saying, how they're acting, how they're conducting themselves. And then you have a group of people who just said, I'm just burning the system to the ground. I just want to change for change's sake, just burn it to the ground. And that's put us at a very dangerous place right now, because that's exactly what they did. And then they're finding out, lo and behold, this candidate that's now our president is doing exactly what he said in terms of looking to persecute minorities. He's also doing exactly the opposite of what he promised in terms of how he was going to help these underprivileged. He's stripping away their health care. The little guy. He had an expression that he was going to come to Washington and drain the swamp and get rid of all these people, when in fact what he's done is he's created the wealthiest, most billionaire cabinet. He's put the antithesis of every head of department in there. He's put someone as head of the education department who never sent her kids to public school. She was against public school. She's a billionaire who donated and said, there's an expression we say, pay to play, where she pays and she expects to get something in return. And she's come out and said, yes, that's, of course we expect something in return.
Could I say that here in Ireland, we have a very, very strong interest in what's happening in America, for very, very good reasons. Historically, of course, because there has been an affinity between the new emerging America of the 19th century and 20th century and Ireland. But the degree of investment which American firms have in this country, and on which much of our economy is based, prompts us to look very carefully at what is happening in the United States. And whether we're talking about corporations who provide, I think, up to 200,000 jobs here, okay, and with all that implies, or whether we're talking about the 50,000 Irish immigrants who went in the 1990s and during the recession here, during the post-Celtic Tiger era. These are of grave concern and of great concern to us. So the policies currently being proposed by your president, and he is your president, okay, even though you wouldn't clearly gather from our conversation, you don't agree with him, and we understand that. But these policies are going to have a profound effect on our well-being. So it's natural that the Irish citizen watches with great care what is happening beyond with you. The Irish voice, however, still seems to carry some degree of influence, because when we were talking to you in Scariff on St. Patrick's Day, there were others of our people beyond in Washington celebrating with the Irish Americans the Irish Day. How important is the Irish voice in American politics, realistically?
It's hard to say at the moment because the president, and he is our president, like it or not. Like I know people who say not my president. I wish that was the case, but that's not how it works. That he is the president, and we always, of course, hope he does well, because when he does well, that's a good thing for all of us. The fear is that he's so ill-equipped for the job that he's going to make us and then the whole world vulnerable. I mean, but in answering to your question, I'd say that it used to have, it was very important to have all voices heard, but you have here a president who puts no value on any of that. He puts the value only on his own intellect. He doesn't take briefings, security briefings, because he says, I'm smart, I know it. Literally, I'm smart, I know it. I don't need somebody to tell me over and over again. So, the last time you had somebody who really didn't listen to outside opinion, it was George Bush, and we wound up in a war that was a disaster for the world. We're in a worse situation, in my opinion, is when George Bush looks like, like I'd vote for him to get him back in, you have a hard situation.
Yes, yeah.
And so the Irish voice doesn't carry any more or less weight than anyone else's voice, because he doesn't listen to anybody.
Yeah, there are very few voices that do matter right now, and unfortunately, the Irish voice is not one of them. It's a very, very small group of people in the U.S. and group of countries outside the U.S. that are really being listened to right now, and that carry influence. So I would say the Irish voice is unfortunately not
Your
import right now.
Secretary of State is, as you indicated earlier, top-class businessman.
Mm-hmm.
A positive relationship with the Eastern European power of Russia. Is that any harm in the long term?
I think it remains to be seen, because there's a sense, and the fear that we have, that Danny and I have, is that our government is now so obviously and openly corrupt and for sale, and there's the Congress, the Republicans in Congress who are supposed to stop this kind of thing, aren't doing anything to protect us against what the founding fathers tried to protect us. There's the checks and balances seem to be gone, and so the fear is that they will be self-dealing, and when you have people who are in the controlling power, like the president or the Secretary of State, who are billionaires whose interests are worldwide, mm-hmm. How can you honestly say that what he's doing is for the benefit of the country and not for the benefit of himself? It's the optics of it are very difficult, and our government has not been willing to look into the ethics situations to say, aha, he's cleared or he's not. And our president hasn't revealed his tax returns, so we don't know the extent of what his holdings are and whether or not he owes money to the Chinese government or to the Russians, so we don't know. And so you have a sense that, is he really doing things that are going to be beneficial for ourselves and as a country, and then and the world at large, or is he just self-dealing, which is his pattern that he's always done? And it's frightening.
Yeah, and it's not just as you were asking about the Secretary of State. There is a level of the business ties in this administration. The numbers of them that are true businessmen first and politicians second is unprecedented, I think.
Yeah, it is.
And one of the concerns is that, and often there have been people in past administrations who have business holdings and so forth. What we are looking for is a greater degree of divestiture. So, in other words, they're not divesting themselves of their business holdings, and therefore, it begs the question when you make policy, is it going to, are you going to make policy based on what is going to benefit your business holdings? And because they have divested themselves, that question has to be asked.
In the past, they would have, everyone previously would have divested themselves of the holdings, or they would have done something, which is to say they put their holdings in a blind trust. So they set up somebody that they have no control over, who doesn't have any contact with them, and that becomes the professional manager of their business during the period that they're serving.
So that there's the sense that the decisions that they're making are not, for that purpose.
So I sense in talking to you a huge degree of frustration. So could we look at the question of how the practice of liberal democracy has really failed in many ways to satisfy the needs of a wide section of people, and I'm not just talking about America.
Right.
I'm talking about the Western civilizations, the countries of the Western world, and I'm thinking in terms of the percentages that support the current administration in the United States. We're looking at something like 51%. In fact, the majority of your voters voted for the Democratic
Correct.
Party.
That's right.
Okay.
Right.
But the way the system organized, it still worked out that we're talking about approximately 49% kind of thing. 49% are currently, or 50% of your population are currently dissatisfied with, in fact, the political structure. So how do you, as an example of that disgruntled segment, large segment of your population, how do you actually now deal with this problem you've been talking about?
Well, that's an excellent question. But to understand the numbers a little bit closer, the numbers that you stated are correct, but you have to recall that not all of the population voted. So the numbers you're talking about are of those that the population voted. So I think this time it was only 40% of eligible voters actually voted, and out of that 40% that was eligible, I think that's right, Danny. It's something like that. But
I thought it was closer to that. The other day I looked it up and it was more like 54%
of eligible. But still, the point is the same. So 3 million more voters voted for Hillary Clinton than voted for Donald Trump. I think if there's a good thing that's happened out of this is the shock of having Donald Trump as president moved people off of the couch, so to speak. It has motivated people to a level that I have not seen really, frankly, since Barack Obama, from the grassroots. It's frightened them because the reality of what's happened has set in, and it would be akin to what we sort of understand as Brexit, this remorse that happened, that wait a second, I didn't think he was really going to get in, or this was really going to happen. And there is no do-over. There's just not a do-over. So we're faced with this situation, and what we have to do is be vigilant every day. So and we have to resist resistance fatigue, which is a very real thing, because we're only 60 days in with the presidency, and it feels like a lifetime. It feels like we have so far to go. But the good news is that there are so many more people that are energized now and are protesting and are saying this is what we want.
Could I come in on the protesting manifestations? Okay. Protests on the streets, such as you're going to see more of in France, okay, that you're going to see probably more of in Holland, and conceivably see more of in Germany. Now, you think about it. If in fact the sense of disgruntlement leads to demonstrations onto the streets, now you know that historically when that starts, it can be a flashpoint, because if the police react aggressively,
Right.
as happened in the north of Ireland in the civil rights era, which led to a particular scene on a bridge where the civil rights people were marching and were attacked by the forces of the state, in other words, the police. We're supposed to be charged with the protection of the citizenry, and that image of an inspector of the police battening a young person on the ground went viral across the world,
Right.
and had a profound effect on international attitude towards the civil rights situation in the North. If, for example, brute force is used, and when you bring 10,000 or 50,000 or 100,000 onto the streets for whatever the cause is, the response of the security to that situation can be either positive or catastrophic. And I'll put that one to you.
Yeah, we've had, right after the election, we've had probably heard there was a women's march where there was I forget the final count, but a million people in the streets and all over the country, and they went very, very peaceably. And there's other marches planned, and the hope is that nobody, I think, wants any kind of violence. But I think that it's having people march and show that sign of solidarity to a cause helps to keep the energy for what really is the basic work. Marching in and of itself is not going to change anything. The way we change in our country is we have to change from the grassroots level. We have to call our congressman, our local official, and say, hey, this is not right. And they have to flood their office because they're always taking a tally. And we have to speak up at that level, because that's if I had to say an order of how it works, it's I'm for my job first, party second, country third. That's how they work. And it's you'd like to think it's a little more altruistic, but it's probably not. Job first is the paycheck, then the party, because that's who I'm answering to. And then if it's good for the country, I'll do it. So we're seeing we're seeing enough people rising up and going to flooding their offices with calls, making sure that they're trying to visit their congressman. I think that's been the good thing that's motivated people that I've seen that maybe bring about a change. Because I really fear personally what would happen if we don't change. Like I fear for my personal safety for the first time. I fear for my kids' safety. I think there's the license to be vocal about ugly stuff that's that someone's carrying in their heart. I mean, I'm in construction, and I have workers from El Salvador who've been here and are citizens and are involved in their church and their communities. Been here, 20 and 30 years. And just outside of their truck, they'll have somebody ride by and yell, "Go back to where you came from. Get out of my country.
Get out of my country.
Get out of my country." Trump's elected. I can say that now. It feels like they've given license to be openly hostile, and I don't think that's the country that I want, or many people want, or that I grew up in, and that's frightening, because you remember that they say, well, look, they came for the socialists, and I wasn't a socialist, so I didn't say anything. Then they came for the communists, and I wasn't a communist, so I didn't say anything. And then they came for me, and there was nobody to say anything. So I feel we have to speak up now. And we have to say something, because our country was founded on supporting the weakest, and it feels like this president values strength and winning and at all, and if you're not a billionaire, you're a nothing, and he's creating a situation where the division of class is going to get larger. It is by removing the regulations. The only thing our country's proven is that without regulation, the rich take advantage of the smaller guy.
So finally, Bennett and Danielle, last week, our Taoiseach, our Prime Minister, visited Washington for the annual Shamrock
Yep.
celebration. Okay. Now, he came in for a lot of criticism. Initially for going. Yet I would imagine the majority of the people of Ireland would support the idea of continuing to respect this celebratory day and the special connection which we have with the United States. At that occasion, he seized on the opportunity to very diplomatically and very sensitively raise the question of our undocumented Irish and the wider immigration history of migration to America, on which the very country is founded, and going back over the centuries. Was he right to go? Do you think, from an American's point of view, was he right to go? And if you agree with him going, do you think he handled it with due political sensitivity?
I think from my perspective, he, taking the questions in reverse, I think he did handle it well. I appreciated the diplomacy with which he made his statements and he addressed issues. It was very clear to all of us what he was saying, and it was appreciated. From my perspective, I appreciate the fact that he came over, because we need to continue to have discourse, with other leaders, and he made his point clear. So I think it was, I was glad that he came, and I was glad that he, made the statements that he did, because we need to continue to have other leaders come and remind America of what we were built on and what we stand for, and that they are watching, that we are in the world's eye,
Yes.
not just the U.S.
I think that's right. I think it's always important to have discourse, and it's a lot easier to have that when you're face to face, where you can look someone in the eye and you can see, you have a connection and feel an energy. I think it's at some level hopeful that our president picks up on that. I'm sure he missed the little dig that went over. The nuance definitely went over his head. There's no question. But I think I agree with Danielle. It's important to hear that from the rest of the world, to be reminded that they are watching, and to reminded of their own sensibilities, and then it shows that there's more of us who think alike in terms of the values for what we want for our kids and the children and the world in general. There's more in common than we have apart, and so I think that makes it important to go, even when it's difficult, even when you've got a difficult person who may not listen, who may not be of the mind to take advice or counsel of anybody. You don't do that strictly because of them. You do that because of yourself, because you have to say, in terms of the resistance, or however you want to put it, to phrase it for yourself, that you have to go to bed saying, I did everything I could do. I feel like that's what we're doing now. I've got to do everything that I can do to be able to sleep at night. Like, God forbid we wind up in another war. There's a lot of us who think we're going to wind up in a war. That he's so impolitic, this president. He's so, unconnected and uneducated about the cultures or sensitivities of other cultures that he's in some cases, like with North Korea poking a tiger, and that there's a really good chance that's not going to end well. They've already changed a policy and taken a tough tone about that they don't understand how Koreans will interpret that. They don't understand the same nuance. They don't have the same jokes or or sensibilities as Americans. And I don't say that negatively. They're just not going to know whether the Americans are kidding. They think there's just so much friction that's like playing with a pack of matches. There's no reason for that. And so I find myself at this moment in time very fearful for that, very hopeful on the other side, because so many young people have said, oh my God, I've made a terrible mistake and I need to change and come up.
So as we bid goodbye to this particular visit to East Clare on your part, I'm wondering, is there any possibility that he could make such a mistake that would invite impeachment and thus provide the opportunity perhaps for another run at a general election?
Do you want to?
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, if he's impeached, then there's no general election because Pence, his vice president, would take over, unless for some reason, the entire election is invalidated, and the likelihood of that is next to nil. So Pence would take over.
Mike Pence.
Yeah, Mike Pence. Is there a chance that he will do something that begs impeachment? Absolutely. I don't think there's any question that there's a very real possibility that he will. In fact, there are things that he has already done that are questionable as to whether they're impeachable offenses. And for the common man who doesn't have is not privy to all of the goings on in back rooms, I think there's very much the hope for many of us that in fact the gears are already in motion, that many of these things are being looked into, and whether they are impeachable offenses, whether he has already done things that are impeachable. But more, I think, than any other person who's ever been elected, almost on day one, there were questions about whether there were things already in place that were not allowed.
And as we led and said that we were been connected, my family has been very fortunate that we've been involved with and have relationships with a number of our senators and our congressmen, and through my father over the years. And I will say that recently we had a dinner with one. Very well known, and he had said,
Tread carefully here.
yes, he had said, I think the gist of the message was he felt like it's a matter of time, that the way an impeachment would happen in our government would be that the Republicans, who controlled by vote the impeachment process, because there's more Republicans than there are Democrats in the House right now, they would have to vote for impeachment. And there was no way the Democrats, if every Democrat voted right now, there's not enough. It's not possible. So the feeling is that, or the sense was that the Republicans want to get some of their pet programs, if you will, through. And then they're going to look for something to get rid of him.
So in fact, he's being used almost as
he's being used as a
vehicle to move their motions through agenda, and then
he's being there's a sense that he's being used as a tool by both the Republicans in Congress and those people behind him, because he's I personally believe him. And I said, not in a negative way do I say this, but I believe a real problem is that he's so unprincipled, and not, I don't mean that in negative, I mean he literally doesn't care. So he doesn't care about your position or my position. He cares about whatever position is going to line his pocket. And I think that's difficult because you can't find a middle ground with somebody like that, because they'll just change. So I think we stand a better chance after of getting back, after, because I do think he will be impeached. Although there's other people who think he might also resign, that he didn't really want the job, and that at a certain point he'll just say, I've had enough.